My landlord said I missed rent, but I knew I didn't. The message came early in the morning, short, direct. You've missed your last 2 rent payments. I stared at it for a second, not confused, not panicked, because I knew something immediately. I hadn't missed anything. Every payment. On time. Every month. Exactly the same. So this didn't make sense. Then my phone rang. My brother. And what he said next made it worse. My name is Kayla Turner. I'm 30 years old. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't a mistake. Before I show you how this started, subscribe and comment where you're watching from, because this story isn't about rent. It's about who expects you not to question things. The message came early in the morning. Not long, not dramatic. Just one line sitting on my screen. You've missed your last 2 rent payments. I read it once, then again, slower this time, because something about it didn't feel right. Not confusing, wrong. 2 payments. Not late, not delayed. Missed. And I knew immediately that wasn't possible, because I don't forget things like that. Not rent. Not something that consistent. So instead of reacting, I just stared at the message and let the silence settle. I didn't need to check right away, because I already knew my routine. Same date every month, same account, same confirmation. I've always been careful like that, not because I had to be, but because I learned early that mistakes cost more when no one defends you. So when I read that message, I didn't feel panic. I felt something else. Certainty that something wasn't adding up. And when something doesn't add up, I don't fix it. I look at it before I could even decide what to do next. My phone rang. My brother. I answered, and the first thing he said wasn't, "What happened?" It wasn't, "Is this true?" Instead, he said, "I already talked to your landlord." I paused, because that wasn't normal. That wasn't concern. That was involvement. Before I even spoke, he was already in it. I asked him carefully, "You talked to him?" And he answered like it was nothing. "Yeah, I didn't want you to mess things up." Mess things up. That phrase stayed with me, because it assumed something, that I had already done something wrong. Then he added, "Just pay it again before this becomes a problem." Not a suggestion, a direction. And that's when something shifted. I leaned back slightly, letting everything settle. Because there were already 2 things that didn't make sense. He knew before I confirmed anything, and he had already spoken to the landlord. That combination wasn't helpful. It was controlled. And the more I thought about it, the less it felt like he was helping me. Before I could process it further, my mom called, and her tone told me everything before she even spoke. Just pay it and move on. No question, no pause, no. "Did you actually miss it?" Then she added, "Why do you always make things complicated?" That sentence landed heavy. Not because it was new, but because it was familiar. I had heard that line before. Different situations, different problems. Same message. Don't question things, don't push back. Don't make it uncomfortable. And suddenly, this situation didn't feel isolated. It felt like a pattern, a way of handling things, by ignoring the truth. Neither of them asked me what happened. Not once. Not even casually. They didn't ask, "Did you pay? Can you check? Do you have proof?" Nothing. Because they weren't trying to understand the situation. They were trying to end it. Quickly. Quietly. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about solving a problem. It was about avoiding one, at my expense, because if I just paid again, everything would go away. No questions, no conflict, no discomfort. For them. And that realization changed everything. So I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't explain anything. I just said, "Okay, I'll handle it," and ended the call. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop talking. Not because you don't have answers, but because you're about to find better ones. If you think this was just a misunderstanding, you're wrong. Because what I found next proved this was planned. After the call ended, I didn't sit there thinking. I went straight to the one place that wouldn't lie, my bank. I opened the app slowly, not rushed, because I already knew what I would find. I just needed to confirm it, month by month. Same amount, same date, no gaps, no delays. Everything was there. Every payment. Sent, processed, completed. And in that moment, one thing became clear. This wasn't my mistake. But I didn't stop there, because sending money isn't the same as it being acknowledged. So I opened each transaction, checked everything. Timestamps, reference numbers, transfer details. And that's when I noticed it. Something small. There were no confirmations. Not this month. Not last month. Not once. At first, it didn't feel important, but the longer I looked, the more it stood out. I leaned back slightly, because now I wasn't just looking at payments. I was looking at how they could be denied. If someone wanted to say, "You didn't pay," what would they need? Not proof of payment. Proof that it wasn't acknowledged, and without confirmations, everything depended on their word. That's when it stopped feeling like an oversight and started feeling structured. So I opened my lease, the same one I signed months ago, the one I hadn't questioned since. Scrolled slowly, line by line, because contracts don't hide things loudly. They hide them quietly. And I wasn't looking for something obvious. I was looking for something specific, something that connected everything. And then I found it. Near the bottom. One line. Easy to miss. All rent payments must be acknowledged within 48 hours. I read it twice, because now, everything shifted. That wasn't optional. It was required. I sat back, because this changed the situation completely. If my payments were sent, but never acknowledged, then, technically, they could be questioned. Not because I didn't pay, but because they controlled the confirmation. And suddenly, this wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. And then something else came back to me, something my brother had said before, casually, months ago. Make sure you always pay early. Landlords notice patterns. At the time, it sounded like advice, but now, it didn't feel random, because he wasn't asking, he was assuming. I didn't call anyone, didn't question it, didn't confront. Because reacting now would only give them time. Time to adjust. Time to explain. Time to change the story. And I wasn't trying to warn them. I was trying to understand everything first, so I started gathering everything. Bank records, transaction logs, screenshots, lease agreement, dates, timestamps, anything that showed what actually happened. Not emotionally, factually, because facts don't argue. They wait. And even with everything in front of me, something still didn't sit right. The message, the pressure, the timing. It all aligned too cleanly. Not messy, not accidental. Controlled. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just a claim, it was a setup. If you think I confronted them right then, you're wrong. Because what I found next proved I wasn't the only one involved. A few days passed, quiet, no follow-up, no calls, no pressure. And for a moment, it almost felt like things had settled. Then the next message came. Short. Official. Eviction process will begin if balance is not cleared. I read it slowly, because this time, the tone had changed. This wasn't a reminder. It was escalation. And that told me something important. They were moving forward. Most people would panic at that point. Call immediately. Try to fix it. Explain everything. But I didn't. Because by now, I understood the situation clearly. This wasn't about confusion. It was about pressure. Pushing me to act quickly. Before I had time to question anything. And once I saw that, the urgency disappeared. So instead of arguing, I replied with one line. Simple. Calm. Please proceed formally. I stared at the message after sending it, because that sentence did something important. It removed control from them. No shortcuts. No quiet fixes. Everything would now be official, and official means documented. After that, everything went quiet again. No immediate reply, no pressure, no follow-up call, and that silence felt different, not confident, uncertain, because they expected resistance or panic, not compliance. And that's when I knew. Something had shifted. Later that evening, my mom texted, "Why are you dragging this?" I read it carefully, because that word, dragging, meant something. To her, this wasn't about truth. It was about inconvenience. Then she added, "Just fix it quietly." That word again, quietly. Quietly didn't mean peacefully. It meant without questions, without attention, without exposure. Because if I paid again, everything would disappear. No records, no proof, no confrontation, no accountability. And that's when I understood fully they needed me to stay quiet. So I didn't answer her, didn't explain, didn't defend myself. Because explaining would only bring emotion into it. And this wasn't emotional anymore. It was strategic. Everything I did now needed to be controlled, clear, documented. That night, I went back through everything again, not just payments, not just the lease, conversations, messages, old chats, anything that connected my brother to this. Because by now, I wasn't just looking at the landlord, I was looking at the pattern. And that's when I found it. A conversation thread. Not recent, but not old either. Between my brother and the landlord. Short messages, casual tone, but one line stood out immediately. "She'll just pay again. She won't question it." I stared at that sentence, because now everything was confirmed. I leaned back slowly, letting it all settle, because now there was no doubt left, no confusion, no missing pieces. This was planned. From the missing confirmations, to the pressure, to the eviction notice, to that message. And in that moment, I stopped being part of their plan and started building my own. If you think I confronted them right away, you're wrong. Because what I did next made sure they couldn't escape it. A few days later, I received the official notice, not a message this time, documents, formal, stamped, clear language, eviction hearing scheduled, date, time, location, everything set. And as I held that paper, I didn't feel panic, didn't feel pressure. Because by now, I understood something they didn't. They thought this was escalation, but for me, this was exposure. I didn't prepare emotionally, didn't think about arguments, didn't plan what to say. Instead, I organized everything. Payment records, lease clause, screenshots, messages, every piece of proof, lined up clearly, because I wasn't going in to defend myself. I was going in to show what actually happened. And truth doesn't need performance. The room was quiet. Still, the kind of silence that makes everything feel heavier. I walked in calmly, sat down, and looked around. That's when I saw them. The landlord, confident, relaxed, like this was already decided. And behind him, my brother, standing there like he belonged on that side. My mom was there too, but not next to me, not supporting, sitting to the side, avoiding eye contact, like she didn't want to be involved, but didn't want to miss the outcome either. And that told me everything, because even now, she chose distance over truth. The landlord spoke first, confident, structured. The tenant has failed to make 2 consecutive rent payments. No hesitation, no doubt, because from his perspective, the situation was simple. Missing payments, clear violation, case closed. And for a moment, it sounded convincing. Then the judge asked something simple, direct. Do you have payment confirmation records? And everything shifted, not dramatically, subtly, because the landlord paused, just for a second. But that second mattered. He tried to respond, tried to stay composed. Payments were not acknowledged. But that wasn't the question. The judge didn't interrupt, didn't react, just waited. And that silence exposed the gap. Because without confirmation, his claim wasn't complete. Then I stood up, calm, no rush, no emotion, and handed everything over. Bank statements, dates, transaction records, clear, organized, undeniable. All payments were made on time. No extra words, no explanation, because the documents spoke for themselves. Then I added one more thing, the lease agreement, open to that line. All payments must be acknowledged within 48 hours. I placed it down. Let it sit there. Because that clause changed responsibility. Not mine. His. And now, everything pointed back at him. The energy in the room shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, controlled. Because now, this wasn't about missed payments. It was about missing accountability. And for the first time, the landlord didn't look confident anymore. If you think that was the end, you're wrong. Because what I showed next exposed who was really behind it. I didn't sit down after presenting the documents because I wasn't finished. There was one more thing, something I hadn't shown yet. Not because I forgot, but because timing matters. And this moment was the right one. I reached into my folder again, slowly, carefully, because what I was about to place down wasn't just proof, it was the truth they couldn't deny. I placed the printed pages on the table, turned them slightly, so they were visible, clear, readable. And then I said nothing, because I didn't need to explain. The judge looked down first, then the landlord, and finally, my brother, because those messages had his name on them. One sentence stood out immediately, highlighted, impossible to miss. She'll just pay again. She won't question it. The room didn't react loudly. There was no gasp, no interruption, just silence. The kind that settles slowly and stays. Because that one line removed every excuse. I didn't look at him right away, but I could feel it. That shift, that loss of control. Because now, he wasn't standing behind the landlord anymore. He was part of the problem. He tried to speak, stopped, tried again. but nothing came out clearly, because there's no clean way to explain being caught for the first time. My mom looked at me directly, not dismissive, not annoyed, shocked, because now there was no version of this where I was overreacting, no way to simplify it, no way to say, just let it go. And in that moment, she finally saw what she ignored. The judge didn't react emotionally, didn't raise their voice. They just looked at the documents, then at the landlord, then at my brother, and said calmly, "This changes the nature of the case." That sentence shifted everything. Because now, it wasn't about rent. It was about intent. The landlord tried to speak, to explain, to redirect, but it didn't work. Because once intent is exposed, everything else loses weight. My brother stayed quiet. My mom said nothing. And for the first time, no one was trying to control the situation. As I gathered my things, ready to leave, a voice came from behind. My father, quiet, but clear. "She didn't make this complicated." Pause. The room stilled. Then he finished. "You made it easy to take advantage of her." No one responded. Because no one could. I didn't stay to hear more, didn't wait for apologies, didn't listen to explanations, because none of that mattered anymore. I walked toward the door, steady, calm, not angry, not emotional, just clear. Because clarity removes everything else. As I stepped outside, I realized something simple. They told me to stay quiet, to avoid problems, to keep things easy, to not question anything. And I did stay quiet, just long enough to see everything clearly, to understand the pattern, and to prove exactly who the problem was. They told me to stay quiet to avoid problems, so I stayed quiet long enough to prove who the problem was. If this story felt real, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be louder. It just needs to be shown at the right time.